Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about ASP.NET Web API and ASP.NET MVC and also difference about Web API and MVC. So let's start with ASP.NET MVC. ASP.NET MVC is a framework for building web apps and APIs using the Model View Controller design pattern. The MVC is an architectural pattern that separates an application into three main groups of components: models, views, and controllers. This pattern helps to achieve separations of concerns. Using this pattern, user requests are routed to a controller, which is responsible for working with the model to perform user actions and/or retrieve results of queries. The controller chooses a view to display to the user and provides it with any model data it requires. As for ASP.NET Web API, it's a framework for building HTTP services that can be consumed by a range of clients, including browsers, mobiles, and tablets. It's very similar to ASP.NET MVC since it contains the MVC features such as routing, controllers, action results, filters, model binders, but it's not a part of MVC framework. It can be used with MVC and other types of web applications. It can also be used as a standalone web service application. Moreover, Web API is a platform for building RESTful service over the .NET framework. Unlike WCF REST service, it uses the full features of HTTP like URIs, request-response headers, caching, versioning, various content formats, and you don't need to define any extra config settings for different devices, unlike WCF REST service. Also, you can mix Web API and MVC controllers in a single project to handle advanced AJAX requests, which may return data in JSON, XML, or any other format. So let's talk about main features of ASP.NET MVC. They are routing, controllers, razor views, action results, filters, model binders, and dependency injection. As for Web API, it supports convention-based CRUD actions since it works with HTTP verbs get, post, put, and delete. Response have accept header and HTTP status code. Also, responses are formatted by Web API's media type formatter into JSON, XML, or wherever format you want to add as a media type formatter. Web API can accept and generate the content which may not be object-oriented, like images, PDF files, and etc. Also, Web API can be hosted within the application or on IIS. Also, Web API supports the MVC features such as routing, controllers, action result, and etc. So let's compare ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web API. ASP.NET MVC is used to create web applications that returns both views and data, but ASP.NET Web API is used to create full-blown HTTP services with easy and simple way that returns only data, not view. Web API helps to build RESTful service over the .NET framework, and it also supports content negotiation. It's about deciding the best response format data that could be acceptable by the client. It could be JSON, XML, Atom, or other formatted data. MVC only return data in JSON format using JSON result. In Web API, request is mapped to the actions, and it's based on HTTP verbs. But in MVC, it's mapped to action names. Unlike MVC, URLs in Web API cannot contain complex types. Complex types must be placed in the HTTP message body, and there should be only one complex type in the body of an HTTP message. features of Web API exist in System Web HTTP assembly, and MVC features exist within System Web MVC assembly. Both libraries are different but act in a similar way. As you know, routing is a pattern matching system that monitors the incoming request and figures out what to do with that request. An URL pattern is matched against the root patterns defined in root dictionary. The first root which successfully matches a controller action parameters defined in the URL will call into a specified controller an action. ASP.NET MVC application and ASP.NET Web API must have at least one root defined in order to function. Visual Studio templates defined for MVC and Web API must have a default root. Now let's understand the difference between MVC and Web API routing. The default root pattern for ASP.NET MVC project is defined as following. It contains root name, controller name, action name, and action parameters. Also, it defines default controller, action, and action parameter. As for Web API, when the Web API framework receives a request, it routes the request to an action, and the Visual Studio project template for Web API creates as following. To find controller, Web API adds controller to the value of the controller variable. To find the action, Web API looks at the HTTP method and then looks for an action whose name begins with that HTTP method name. For example, with GET request, Web API looks for an action that starts with GET, such as GET product or GET all products. These conventions applies only to GET, POST, PUT, and DELETE methods. You can enable other HTTP methods by using attributes. And other placeholder variables in root template, such as ID, are mapped to action parameters. With the default routing template, Web API uses HTTP method to select the action. However, you can also create a route where the action name is included in URI. As for caching, in ASP.NET MVC, for example, you can use the action with output cache attribute. Unfortunately, in Web API, it doesn't have built-in support for this attribute, and there are few open source implementations of caching. For example, Strofe Web Cache Output. It's a small library bringing caching options similar to MVC output cache attribute. As for sessions, they are like cookies, and they are used to store some data that can be retrieved anywhere in the application. To work with them in ASP.NET MVC, you can use the session object. For example, in one controller method, you can set the session value, and in another method, retrieve session value. As for Web API, REST by design is stateless, and by adding session to Web API or anything else of that kind, you are making it stateful and defeating any purpose of having a RESTful API. The whole idea of RESTful service is that no client context being stored on the server between requests, and each request from any client contains all the information necessary to maintain the request, and the session state is held in the client. So if you wish to have a RESTful API, you should most likely make changes. Web API controllers can be created and hosted in any ASP.NET application, not just MVC. An obvious reason to create Web API is if you do not have a MVC frontend. MVC controllers typically rely on the MVC framework, and if you look at the default templates, you will notice that almost all MVC controllers are implemented with a view. So use MVC controllers when you intend to respond with a view, and use Web API for anything that isn't dependent on a particular view. If you don't require the model binding behavior of MVC, your service is data-centric and operation are data-centric, for example, CRUD operations. And you likely want to create Web API controller instead of model view controller. And if your operations are view-centric, for example, you deliver a user admin page to the user, you will want to create MVC controller. Also, as alternative to Web API, you can look at web framework Nancy. Nancy is a lightweight framework for building HTTP-based services on .NET and Mono. Nancy is designed to handle delete, get, head options, post, put, and patch requests, and provides a simple domain-specific language for returning a response. You can get Nancy from NuGet, TeamCity server, or download the source from GitHub repository. So reasons to choose SPNet MVC are separation of concerns, which provides more understandable and highly efficient design that makes it easy to work on. Also development along with testing, search engine optimization, so the formed URL will be easy to understand and can be searched easily by the other user after release of your application. And also more interactive interface. User can use it very easily, and it can be combined with different tools. Also, in another word, it provides easy interaction to other applications also. And reasons to choose SPNet Web API. So you should choose this because if you need a web service and don't need SOAP, then SPNet Web API is the best choice. Web API is used to build simple, non-SOAP based HTTP services on top of existing WCF message pipeline. Web API doesn't have tedious and extensive configuration like WCF service. Also simple service creation with Web API. For example, with WCF REST services, service creation is difficult. And Web API is based on HTTP, and it's easy to define, expose, consume in a RESTful way. It has lightweight architecture and good for devices like smartphones. So before you choose between SPNet MVC and Web API, you should answer these questions. You need to decide, do you want to expose functionality within one specific application, or you wish to expose it as a generic functionality. In the first case, MVC controllers may serve your needs. Instead of creating a whole new API controller approach can be quick and easy for exposing functionality for a given web application. The second approach is good if you wish to create full-fledged REST service that is not tied to just single application. Many client applications want to consume this service, and in such cases, a Web API offers a more elegant and neat solution. Also, you need to think about data formats. MVC controller usually returns HTML markup or JSON formatted data. If these data formats fulfill your needs, then MVC controller can be used to expose your functionality. However, if you need multiple data formats such as XML or JSON, then Web API allows an easy way to configure them. Web API decides the data format automatically based on accept header. MVC controller, on the other hand, requires you to explicitly specify the data format, action result or JSON result, while writing the action methods. Content negotiation refers to returning content in a format as indicated by accept header. Using Web API, you can send content to the client in a variety of formats, such as images or files, not just XML or JSON. Although this is a nice features for Web API, not all application needed. So in most cases, sending data as JSON is what you need. Also, you need to think about hosting of your application. If you expose functionality through MVC, you must host it in IIS. This is obvious because ASP.NET MVC applications require IIS as a hosting environment. Web API, being a service framework, allows you to host an API in a custom host. It's called self-hosting. In this case, you can avoid overheads of IIS and host a Web API in a lightweight custom host. This is typically used where service is to be consumed by a wide array of clients, such as desktop applications and web applications. By default, Web API uses HTTP verb-based mapping for invoking methods. Moreover, all the request data is wrapped in a single parameter and passed to the method under consideration. This makes the Web API action names and signatures bit inflexible. You cannot, for example, have a method that has 5 parameters. Similarly, you can have multiple methods for the same HTTP verb, except GET, where you can have 2 methods. So to develop a Web API, you need to be aware of these design restrictions. In case of MVC controller, you don't have such restriction. MVC model binding take care of mapping the request data with appropriate parameters of an action methods. These are just notes that will help you to decide what to use, Web API or MVC. You can also use both techniques in a single web application. I hope you learned something new from this topic. Thank you for your attention and have a great evening.